Duke, Dr. Powers, your guests have arrived.
Thanks, Bonnie Castle, as always. Hi, folks. Come on in. I brought my daughter's dog with me today. Her name is Wilhelmina. My daughter's in assisted living for a little bit, and so I'm dog sitting. And so Wilhelmina, when I take her out of course, we have to call her Duke. So today she's Duke and with me, but I thought you'd like to see my pup. She's 10 years old, and we spend a lot of time together. Now, you hop down, Will. I should have said Duke. Now, sit. Good dog. Paper today. This is week 5. We're over the hump and heading down. Let me talk about papers if I can. Day is Wednesday. I expect tonight at some point to finish marking them and get them out to you tomorrow, Thursday. So the time you see this on next Monday, you'll have those papers back. By and large, I was pleased with the marks. I hope you were too. It was well done. A number of them were exceptionally well done. I was quite delighted with them. The second assignment, Sunday night, midnight, will be in by now, the time you see this on Monday morning. And the same thing, it takes me time to do the feedback for each one of them, but it's every 2 weeks, and I'll get them back to you before you do your final individual paper, again, to give you some guidance as to what I'm looking for. But I can't foresee any difficulties with it. The individual case is coming up. A number of people said, where are the details? And if you just do one more click, you'll find the questions and everything you need there to do the individual case. I suspect by now you've located them. That's the one that's going to count. That's the money. Up to here, we've just had the practice cases of Sleeman's and Railroads Goes Global in the Railroads case. And that's just to give you some sense of how to do it and practice some of the models and tools and talk to your colleagues to get a sense of it all. The individual paper, I encourage you to talk to your friends. There's nothing wrong with that. Get what models that they're using, what models you're going to use, discuss some of the questions, and then present your answers. But your answers must be yours. You can't give me a cut and paste and use it 5 times for all people on the team. So it's got to be individual work at that point. Further to that, I've given you the option for those that want to do their individual paper like a consulting report. As long as you address those questions somewhere in the report, it'll take you a little longer to do, but I'll certainly mark it and give you some feedback from a consulting report position. But for others that just want to get it done and get it out of the way, just do the 7 questions and deal with them seriatim. Question 1, the answer is. Question 2, the answer is. And just roll through it and finish it up. Give me some references if you go outside the case. I don't need any references for what's in the case, but if for some reason you go out, but you shouldn't have to. The general thinking is that we all work at the same point in time that the case talks about. So I'm not looking for you to do any secondary research whatsoever. And tools and things, models, you can put at the back as appendices, and that helps keep your word count roughly where it has to be. As a consultant, generally your clients aren't concerned so much with the modeling. What they want is the executive summary, the so what does all this data information in your SMART model actually mean, or strategic group map actually mean. That's what they're paying for, and that would be in the actual report. Anyway, have fun with it. You're ready for it, and it's practice again to get you ready for the final exam. And again, I'll push through all 80 plus of those and give you lengthy feedback as to what I think you might have done better and what you did well prior to the exam. So it's going to take me a hard 2 weeks to get all 80 of them done. They take about an hour each, and you can do the math. It's a bit of work to get them done. What else is on my mind? I think that is everything that covers our cases. Hope you have fun. Oh, let me say on the Sleeman's case, if I can. The Sleeman's cases were just some simple little answers. The feedback I gave you and the notes that I had and just roughly put together and sent them out for you, don't be alarmed, don't be overwhelmed by it. I just want to give you a sense of what, if you had more time, the type of stuff you could do. But I wasn't expecting that for you in your practice case of the Sleemans. It just asked you to look at the specific questions and do some of the modeling with it. So don't be overwhelmed by the feedback that I sent out to you on Friday night with respect to the what could have gone into the Sleeman's case. Once again, I left my glasses at home, so I'm struggling here. The first question is about Ottawa pressing the Catholic Church groups to meet their settlement obligations, and this arises out of the Indigenous affairs. It arises out of the homes that the Catholic Church set up and monitored and were paid to run, etc., over the years, and the damages they did. And finally, as a way to saw it off in Canada, and although money can't compensate or mitigate the damage that was caused to so many Canadian Indigenous children at these residential schools, $25 million was set as a fair settlement at the time to help with the healing process and reconciliation. And the Catholic Church said to use their best efforts to raise the $25 million. It's now 7 years later, and notwithstanding the fundraising effort from the parishes trying to pull some money together, they've raised a total of $3.7 million. The required $25 million has been it's been 7 years. And so as a Catholic, I have to say, and it's a lesson to all of us, when you're dealing with bad news, with bad public relations, something you're embarrassed about, something you don't want to be on the front page of the paper, and again, I draw the Bentley ethical test into play. Don't tiptoe by the cemetery, the graveyard. Get this over with, pay up the bill. There's no reason the Catholic Church, although I'm not familiar with their finances, but I can't imagine with the properties they have and they don't pay taxes on, etc., they can't raise $25 million instantly and pay this bill and do the right thing. And if they want to recapture and put that money back wherever it came from, whatever cost center it came from within the accounts of the church, then over 7 years, whatever years it takes, reimburse it, bring it back. So I'm embarrassed as a Catholic, that's the situation, and I'm embarrassed for all my colleagues that should be calling out and talking to the parish priest about this. In fact, this Sunday I'll be doing that. Anyway, let's go on to the next one. Rousseff, Brazil going on again. As you recall, last week there was some talk about impeachment, and their equivalent to the House of Commons have just passed a motion to impeach her and get her out of office. And her response was, this is a gender card, that because she's a woman, this is why they're doing it to her. And so why don't we look at that one more time and say when and when not to play the gender card. The little bit of reading I've done about it, it seems to me there's sufficient grounds to warrant that her actions have not been the appropriate actions of a leader, and she deserves to be impeached. But I could be wrong, no wrong right answers, but let's look at that today. But there are times a gender card has to be played, but I notice Hillary Clinton does it with some frequency in this election. So we have, that's not to say we don't have glass ceilings and glass cliffs and things that do have to be looked at. The election, of course, down south with Trump and Hillary and what's going on is of interest. The political ideology, the impact on Canada, we've been through that. I see Manitoba is just after 17 years got a new leader in taking over from the NDP. NDP wanted to raise taxes. The Conservatives have come in, and right-wing Attila Hun have talked in terms of trying to bring down the budget a little bit and to reduce the taxes and certainly not put through the taxes that they're doing. So it's a fresh new approach. I had a call from Scott, one of your folks in the colleagues, who was chatting with me a bit about this and to see where it goes. So there's some fresh new air blowing through Manitoba, whether it be good or bad, depends on your political ideology. But those that are on the left-wing, socialist, collectivist, one for all for one, are going to find it a strange world for a little bit as the Conservatives come into power and put some of their political philosophy and ideology into play. Well, let's talk a bit about that today in Manitoba, and it's going to be a good or a bad thing. This was fun. Picture of Chrétien, who's getting quite long in the tooth, but the little fellow from Shawinigan. He always call himself the little fellow from Shawinigan. There's a picture of him here. He must be well into his late 80s at this point, but he's shaking hands with the second in command in China, and the premier from China reported that it's going to be like the old days, the old golden years under Chrétien, and before him the senior Trudeau the first. And just to digress for a little bit, I remember that in about night when the bamboo curtain came down in 1978, and they opened up and gained access into the globalization and started to get ready to make application to the World Trade Organization, etc., etc. The first off the mark to welcome them aboard about a year later was Trudeau the first. He went over there and walked on the Great Wall for the first time and had pictures taken. He was the first of the developed nations to shake hands and welcome the Chinese into joining the new global world that was unfolding. And I guess that's what they're referring to back with the young Trudeau taking over and maybe walking his dad's footsteps. We'll see closer alliances, fits, partnerships with China, and there's one I'll talk about today about a new rail line in northern Ontario coming in. So it's interesting to see, and I have to say we blew it. During the Long March, we had a Canadian doctor, Dr. Norman Bethune, who worked very closely with Mao Zedong and supported and did wonderful things. And Mao had him like a brother and worshipped, and as a Canadian, he certainly carried our flag well in that particular Long March that ended in 1949 when Chiang Kai-shek took the other side of the fighting forces and went to Formosa in those days, now Taiwan, and became sort of the yapping dog for the Americans to keep back the communists, Mao, in 49. But the point I'm making is with Bethune is that Canada's cards were flying high with the Chinese as a result of Bethune. In fact, there are statues to Bethune in China, and for the longest period, it was only up until recently, every child in China opening up the morning affairs would sing an ode, a song to Norman Bethune for all the wonderful things he did during the time of the Grand March. And so Canada had a place, and then we blew. We lost our political capital with our treatment and how we did it and what we insisted upon. And so there seems to be now a move back towards Canada and China coming a little closer together in some of their thoughts. And certainly that's important to us because we have to do some more economic decoupling from America. We're down from 84 down to about 72%, but we still need more diversification. We need to have more trade agreements and active trade agreements with Brazil and the BRIC nations and the Europeans and Asia and China and Vietnam and Middle East. We need to keep developing. So we talked last week in the Middle East. We sold them some armored personnel carriers. We need to do more of this to get that broader base, so we're not completely hostage. That when the Americans say jump, we say how high when it comes to some things that are our national security interest, and not necessarily in America's national security interest. And so I'm an advocate for this, building better relationships and more trade arrangements with other nations. Not being anti-American, but it's just prudent, like Apple, that we grow more suppliers to supply us the inputs and not be over-reliant on one supplier for a product. So anyway, interesting picture there of Chrétien coming up at a retirement and shaking hands and being well received by the Chinese, so good for him. Oh, here it is. The Chinese engineers endorse a $2 billion Ring of Fire rail line, which is going to run up to James Bay, which is a little bit into the Hudson Bay. And on its face, that's interesting. Open up this rail line, $2 billion, a big infrastructure project. I suspect, though it's not said in the article, that Bombardier are licking their chops, hoping that they can be part of this. It would help Bombardier out of the fire right now as they do it. But it occurred to me, if we actually put this rail line in, that gives the right-of-way and the passages and the tracks. It would not be a quantum leap at the same time to connect the pipes that come out of Alberta and run gas and oil up here to Hudson Bay, and by Hudson Bay across the superhighway of the Atlantic, and take Alberta and Saskatchewan, their fossil fuels, etc., to Europe. And keep in mind that the Europeans pay a premium for their oil and gas, rather than just the West Texas rate, which the Americans quote. And keep in mind the West Texas rate, when we ship to the States, we even give them a discount off that. So they say it's $40 a barrel. We're ending up paying about paid $30 a barrel for it. And if we sent our oil and gas off to Europe, we'd probably get $10 to $12 more over the West Texas price. So there's a lot to be said considering that to stop this landlocked system for resources out of Alberta. It may be just the card we need to not be overly concerned about the Keystone Pipeline, which is blocked, and in northern BC, the northern pipeline that is blocked by First Nations and others, environmentalists. This may solve the problem. Just say, fine, take the existing pipeline, bolt it on, and run up to Hudson Bay there and take our gas out that way. Could be a good thing. Anyway, let's talk about the Ring of Fire. And I want to push a little more. It's one of the NDP, Charlie Angus, NDP, a representative for the northern riding of Timmins in the James Bay area, said, why are we using the Chinese government to build a railway that maybe the Canadian government should be doing? And of course the answer is foreign direct investment. But there's not enough money in Canada to do all the infrastructure work required for the oil sands and $2 billion for pipelines, etc. We need foreign direct investment, and Chinese money is just as good as anybody else's. They're doing it all over the world. We talk about the Caribbean being Chinese, Gold Coast are Chinese. Many nations in Africa have large Chinese components. They come in as reasonably good corporate citizens. They provide infrastructure, but they don't demand a regime change and try to get too involved in politics. Not surprisingly, China is having some role to play in Canada, and with it will come some influence, and we have to be alert for that. But is the Chinese investment in Canada a good or a bad thing? Is there merit in the idea of using that pipeline pathway facility to add another pipe for oil and gas to go up alongside of it? Something we can talk about. Big page spread again about the Catholic Church falling $21 million short on the promise to pay $25 million 7 years ago and haven't done it. Embarrassing. McKenna, she's our environmental minister, is talking about market signals on carbon, global warming, and the carbon tax and what we should be paying. And it's interesting. I mean, they say the science is given it's locked up on global warming. And I'm a bit of a heretic anyway and like to poke the bear, but to me I'm saying there are other causes. And you only have to look at solar flares and the anomalies that exist in solar flares. You only have to look at the history of this planet over millions of years to see the ebb and flow of global warming and ice caps and one thing or another. That's not to say there's not some involvement by emissions. But they point out here, of course, is that when Canada pushes ahead with this and puts in this global tax, etc., he says competitive disadvantages because other foreign rivals will not be paying these. And so we want to ship our gas we just talked about to Russia, not to Russia, but to Germany and to the European Union through the Hudson Bay. It's a commodity. It's like salt, sugar, gold. And if the going rate is such and such, and we have to pay an extra 50 cents as part of the cost of doing business because of global tax, they'll take the gas from another country and use that. And so it's a global marketplace, and you'll soon be out of business if you can't keep up with your competitor on your value chain and your bottom line. So it's a challenge for us to do it. And the other thing that drove me a little crazy this week is Bill Nye, the science guy. And I enjoy listening to him. He's got some wonderful little insights into engineering and science sort of projects. But if you look at his background, he's an engineer. He's not a scientist in that sense. He's not a doctorate in some sort of science that can comment on environmental no more than I can. But nevertheless, he was one that made a proposal this week that folks like me that are heretics and say that there could be other causes, it should be a criminal code offense, and I should be charged under the criminal code for having this sort of dialogue of free speech. So he lost my vote this week when he came out with that foolishness. But anyway, we could talk about it. And keep in mind, too, that global warming, there's another side of that. If you get a second this week, Google the word global dimming, D-I-M-M-I-N-G, global dimming, where we're getting less sunlight on the Earth over time. And as a result of that, impacts the food supplies, particularly in certain parts of the world. And Israel is one of those that is impacted significantly by global dimming. So just to improve our awareness of things, have a look at global dimming this week as well and see what you think of it. In Israel, an Israeli was convicted, 31-year-old, for killing a young 16-year-old Palestinian. The Israeli fellow with two of his cousins went out and just for a drive one night picked up a young man, and the Israeli's name is Yosef Ben David, and he picked up a young 16-year-old Palestinian walking on the streets of their truck, beat him, poured fluid over him and burnt him, and so he got a life sentence out of it. But it's just a symptom of the hatred and things that are going there, and it continues. It's the Balfour Agreement. It's people, if I stepped into your land and took your property away from your dad, and you'd just be angry 20, 30 years later when you drove by it and said, we used to own that, and the Balfour Agreement, the Europeans just said, they're squatting, they're coming in, this is their land, you're out. And it's caused some rift, and I don't know the way around it, but I can tell you what we can't do is continue today, that we have, down below you have the Gaza block on the Mediterranean, and up here you have the West Bank, and there's no real way on the railway to link the two pieces of Palestine. And they're controlled by two separate political, Hamas and I'll think of it in a minute, the two groups, and they got to bring the supplies in by sea from the Mediterranean. And so you have this interference on simply in your country, Gaza and the West Bank, trying to get fuel and food up here, being stopped by the Israelis on the railway. And so it's this sort of tension, it's the encroachment into the West Bank. The Israelis are continuing to, notwithstanding the public condemnation globally about stop it, they're continuing to knock down buildings and build their own settlements as they keep encroaching into the West Bank. And so there's a large body of folks saying the solution is that they pull back to the 1967 war boundaries, which was still an enhancement over what we started with in 1949. I could be wrong, the year 49. In any event, these are just symptoms, these little flare-ups. We have to go right to the core of it and have that conversation. But right now there's trust, there's pain, a lot of hatred, and I don't know how we're going to resolve it, but certainly the idea of the frustration of having to go through a passport, a gate to get from Gaza to the West Bank, and the frustration of seeing further encroachment by the Israelis, which indicates no sign of they're going to settle this thing, they're just going to keep taking properties. I can understand the frustration on both sides. Needs to be looked at, worth a conversation. Stricken Africa needs our help. An issue, they're having drought over there, particularly countries, I'm looking for them, pull them out here, about 36 million people in the eastern and southern part of Africa at risk. They're out of water, they're out of food supplies, and of course we don't read a lot about it in our papers. In fact, I talked, I think, a week or two back that 5 million folks in the Congo area have been killed over the last 7 or 8 years in the Congo, and not a big article in the paper at all about it. 2 of our soldiers get killed in a conflict in the Middle East, and of course the papers festooned, and rightfully so, with stories. So we need to broaden our awareness of what's going on in Africa and the help they need down in this area. It's quite troubling. Oh my! Facebook online jail. The social media giant has a mandatory identify policy, and it sparks debate with users. And so one Canadian, I think it was, Canadian found herself in jail. It means that she's locked out of her account on Facebook after years and years of building her contacts. And I have to confess, I don't have a Facebook. But with her, it was very much part of her way of life. She had her little icon that's her, and she had contacts around the globe she built up over the years. And for her, it was very much a social exercise of staying in touch. And for some reason, they got a sense that she wasn't who she was. And so Facebook demanded that she make available her passport and her driver's license in order to get her account back. She fought it for 5 weeks, and the only way about it was give it or get off Facebook. And so reluctantly, she turned over Canadian information to Facebook. And keep in mind, Facebook works very closely with the CIA and that database and face recognition, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's troubling that these large mammoth organizations on comes of privacy and security and data sovereignty, etc., have no problem at whim cutting you out of your Facebook if the sky's blue and they want to, and there's not much you can do about it. So we could talk a bit about Facebook and going to jail on Facebook, which is an interesting thought. On the financial side of the pages, I see the dollar's up almost, folks, to 79, bang on 80 cents. That's pretty remarkable. Of course, driven in large part by gold, which is still moving up, and oil's moving up. And I have to say, I'm surprised by oil at the $42 range. I thought for sure with the agreement between, I think we talked, if we didn't, the agreement was proposed last weekend between Saudi, Iran, and Russia. It fell apart. The Saudis were quite angry and are determined to drive the price of oil down as low as they can possibly drive it, because the demand-supply curve of supplying fossil fuels was imbalanced until the Americans started producing the new technology, fracking, which enabled the Americans to produce so much more oil for the global economy, and as a result has distorted the balance that was there traditionally over the years had been developed. And so the question is who, whether it be America or the Middle East countries, are going to cut back on their production, hence less revenues, in order to maintain the price high. And the Saudis have had enough. They said we're going to drive the price right down to the $20 barrel range. And so that's playing out. But on a sideline with that, a parallel side of that is, I mean, that's got all sorts of ripples. You can take the countries like Venezuela. You can take the countries like Brazil with the offshore oil play there, and all other nations that are borderline, to include Canada and our oil sands. When you start going down to $20 a barrel, Russia, you're going to completely cause great economic disruption to these countries, and they're going to need the IMF to bail them out. And of course, the IMF in large part is the G8, G9 countries, and Canada doesn't have the money, but we're going to be called upon to help the IMF bail out some of these countries, which means what? It means we go down the basement in monetary policy, we start printing the printing machines to raise some more money to put into the system to bail out these other countries. And so when the Saudis drive this down to $20, if they can do that, it has a lot of ripples to the global economy and to us here in Canada. And so we could look at that. But on the sidebar of that, I was noted that last night in the news, I saw President Obama on Tuesday night boarding his presidential jet to whisk himself off to Saudi, to the kingdom, to meet with King Solomon, the king over there. He had been summoned. And the king has made it clear in no uncertain terms that the commission that reported on 9/11, there was 28 pages in there that had been redacted. And only a few people who have sworn an oath not to repeat it know what's in there. But some of the stories we get on television, and just stories at this point, indicate that the Saudis played a role. I'm not saying Saudi government necessarily, but Saudis, and I've heard you mention one of the princes, have funded some of these people to train and move them around and get. And I recall at the time of seeing President Bush just after 9/11 walking the Saudis, and they're the only people allowed to fly to get them out of the country for some reason, and holding hands to get them up and going. And so my point is that that redacted document, if it implicates the Saudis in some way or some princes in the Saudi regime over there, and if the money comes from Saudi, keep in mind bin Laden was a Saudi and 15 of the 19 were Saudis apparently, then it opens up the floodgate for all those involved in 9/11, for the buildings, for the 3,000 people killed, for the first responders, for the damages done, class actions. And so the Saudis say, we need to get out of the country as fast as we can if you're going to release that document. Our $750 billion worth of treasury bills, etc., and other assets are coming out of America, so they can't be attacked, which is prudent. Get your assets out of there if it looks like a lawsuit's coming. And so that has great implications to that demand-supply curve for a fiat currency, the American currency, because it's under stress right now as people want less and less to pay for their oil in dollars, etc. And a $1 trillion hit thrown into the marketplace quickly. In fact, that $2 billion I just talked about on the Ring of Fire rail line that the Chinese want to build, that $2 billion, I suspect, is simply exchanging these promissory notes, these treasury bills of America, into hard assets, a rail line in Canada, and they're going as fast as they can to unload these treasury bills and get hard assets and supply chain resources lined up. And so Obama has gone over there to work this out. There's a lot of tension right now between the Saudis and the Americans, and how this all unfolds. Because you got that conflict, you've got the idea, okay, let's keep it secret, which preserves the relationship between Saudi and the Americans. And keep in mind, Saudi versus Iran and Shia versus Sunni all come into play at this point. And so there's an argument for the Americans to say, in our best national security interest, let's maintain the status quo. Let's not release those documents because they're going to do us injury, up to $1 trillion dumped on the market. But the other side of the coin is the people who lost family members in 9/11 deserve, it seems to me, to know the facts. Because up to this point, they've been told it was something called Hussein in Iran and Afghanistan and bin Laden and all weapons of mass destruction, etc., etc. I think they deserve to know the truth. And so this is unfolding this week, and it will unfold quickly. Certainly, if I was a lawyer in a class action, the minute I got those documents, there'd be a freeze put on any Saudi asset I could find until I had a chance to get to the bottom of this. Now, keep in mind, there is legislation that sovereign nations can't sue each other, but that doesn't mean we couldn't sue individuals if they've been responsible for taking some of their money over. So it's a little murky, but it's certainly a fear, and that's what's going on as we speak today with Obama and King Solomon in Saudi Arabia. Quite interesting. So it's unfolding as we see, as it does, and certainly if there's a falling out, keep in mind again, as it's falling out, it was the Saudis in 1971 that when the Americans under Nixon went off the oil standards, it was the Saudis and the Americans got together and said, we'll price oil just in US dollars, which gave it an underlying asset to base it on, and hence that holds up the American dollar. But if that collapses, if that agreement is over, then the Saudis, for regime change, will no longer be protected by Americans, and equally, the American dollar will no longer necessarily be quantitated in U.S. dollars. And so there's lots of stuff spinning around over here, if we can, to look at. Argentina, finally, after 15 years, Argentina went into a economic spin, bankruptcy, didn't honor its treasury bills 15 years ago on the international global markets. Investors now, they're putting out another, for the first time, and after 15 years, putting another IPO out there for treasury bills, trying to sell some sovereign bonds, etc. They want to raise $36.5 billion US, and a large offering. I don't know how it's going to take out, but we'll see. But certainly, they're coming back into the global capital markets. Certainly the loonie's gone up since we've started our course dramatically. We're getting close to bang on 80 cents. I think when we started, we were banging on 70 cents. That's a big difference, almost 11% for anybody in Canada doing business. It makes a difference. If you're importing, helps you out. If you're exporting, makes it a little more costly for Americans to buy our products. Look at that. Delta eyes Bombardier for a bigger C series. It's just talk at this point. right now Bombardier will hang on to anything because financially it's having some great difficulty. Boardroom diversity, women accounted for less than 3% of the incoming CEOs in 2015, according to Price Waterhouse study, of the world's largest companies. 3%. So is that a fair representation? In Canada, 51% of the population would be females, and 3% of incoming CEOs in the globe are women. Worth looking at. Intel cuts 12,000 jobs. I had that conversation. I think we've been saying Intel has been that sense of hubris in running what they've been running. They haven't been hungry, they haven't been on fire. And so they've just replaced in the last month some of their CEOs and senior management. They're crafting new strategies, trying to move in new directions. I see here they're pruning the rose bush and cutting off product lines they don't need, and they've just cut 12,000 jobs off. They're trying to very quickly trim down and get lean and mean again and return back to their knitting. And the question is it too late? If they miss the window, will young upstarts start eating their cake? And I suspect they will. Our Bank of Canada, Stephen Pelosi, talks in terms of our prospects, and of course, they're not going to tell us they're bad, but they tell us that we're marginal at best. I think it's 1.4%, he says, is what he anticipates our growth will be, which is hardly growth, 1.4%. It's hard to pay our bills and keep pace with what we're paying out at that rate. So we could look a little at that. Nova Scotia, they're raising up tobacco tax, but this is just, again, a symptom of what's going on across Canada, is that governments are not pruning the rose bush, but the way around it is find new ways to tax us. And so they want to do that. HST increases in Prince Edward Island, health services tax, going from 14% to 15%. Another story of the same thing. Governments need more revenue. Marketing boards. Big article in here in agriculture talking about the vast array of marketing boards of milk and poultry, maple syrup, wheat, etc. Under these new trade agreements, they're going to be threatened to some extent. And so we should look a bit at marketing boards, and are they still relevant, and what impact will new trade deals that Canada's entering into, both the Pacific and the one with the Europeans, what's the impact going to be? And it doesn't look good. My first reading of the TPP, etc. We're going to find this stuff from marketing board is going to, although it's provided for in some places in the thing, it's going to be interesting, a challenge for us. Part of this new world order, everything is gravitating to one central global government. One more little step, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank are now joining forces with other international organizations for cooperation on tax issues and developing new tools and standards to tax multinational enterprises. So we see this new global order coming together with more rules and regulations by people who haven't been elected by Canada. They'll have sanctions and adjudication boards, probably in Brussels, that will make rulings on Canadian companies. It's just one more slip, and they really haven't told us much about this, but we're moving towards this centralization and losing more and more sovereignty here in Canada, as all nations are. Wind power is gaining momentum. The numbers here, well, the energy group, the numbers I had here, they're going to, be 8% of the world's electricity, 20% by 2030, and almost 1/3 of the energy in the world by 2050 will be from wind. The point is, increasingly, wind is taking hold, and as the new microchips and things come in and make it even far more efficient, the same on solar power, that will exacerbate the situation even more. So the question is, for fossil fuel industry, they've got to see this as another competitor growing and going to eat part of their market share. And the argument has always been in the past, well, wind stops, it's not dependable. But if you look at that Moroccan situation, we talked about a week or two back, where they take solar power panels and steam from the solar power runs the steam, but heats their sand in the desert. Very efficiently, they can power 1 million homes, and what the heat is retained in the sand overnight heats during the night, and during the day the solar power starts up again. And of course, with solar panels in the sky, don't have to worry about that anymore. So technology, Internet of Everything is changing this, and wind power is just one of those. And I suspect they could do the same thing on some of the sand in Canada. We have deserts in Canada, one here in BC. They could do it. Yeah, proposed aluminum tariff by the U.S. They've targeted Canada. 66% of the aluminum that Americans get, they buy from Canada. And right now, their own U.S. smelting industry is in a basket case situation, so they're lashing out and lobbying, and they're saying, well, we can't take Canadian aluminum anymore. There's something unfair going on, and so let's bring in action. So it's before the adjudication board on trade to see whether we are living by the rules of the agreement or not. But these are our friends. These are people that we soldier with, and in fact, I'm digressing again for a minute, but the first troops in Afghanistan, I was very proud. We sent over the Canadian Regiment, the 1st Battalion of the PPCLI, Princess Patricia Light Infantry, the 2nd Battalion, Princess Patricia Light Infantry, and they were awarded during the Korean War for standing and holding their ground and protecting the Americans, the Presidential Citation, a little blue patch with a gold thing around it. And I was so proud that the first troops off, it was like the Victoria Cross, so proud that that regiment was the first one we sent to Afghanistan, and the Americans there who were there ahead of us, seeing this regiment get off, it must have been an awe to see a Canadian regiment carrying that on their shoulders. It was quite a thing. And so my point is that it's disappointing that the American cousins, American friends, and we're almost moving towards a political union on many, many fronts, that this stuff continues, that pipelines and lumber cord and now aluminum, that we're fighting back. Retired number of retirees are trying frequent trading, and I have to confess I'm one of those. But good advice to say watch what you're doing. Iran is tempting. They're saying Iran right now the background. Iran has got a GMP, a budget of just about 400 billion. It's got a population of about 80 million. The population that's under 35 is 60%. And Royal Roads, we taught there for a couple of years in a partnership, and you have Royal Roads MBA alumni who are Iranians, well qualified. Most of them got the degrees in London, engineers, etc., ran businesses, middle class. Yes, they have their own political up here, but the actual working folks that I dealt with there in the schools, politics wasn't really part of what they were doing. Now, we'll push them. If we push them, they'll protect their country, and we'll be driving them away, and we shouldn't be doing that. But the point here, what the article is that Iran is tempting. It's a great place to do business. It's coming around, and with some of these barriers to trade, sanctions being removed, maybe Canada should consider being first mover advantage and get involved in Iran. Certainly, you've got a Rolodex and some colleagues over there carrying the same degree that you carry as a contact. Gold and silver are forecasted to continue to go up. U.S. gateway on supply chains to the world. Many, many countries are using the U.S. supply chains because of the advantages. They have the brand, they have the infrastructure in place, and so Canadians increasingly are going down there. And I was struck the other day when I looked at the small businesses in Canada. Those are businesses less than 500. And the small business in Canada, 98% of what we do are small businesses. They make the jobs in Canada. They are Canada, about 190,000 of them. But when you go to the States, only 50% of the businesses down there are small business. And that seems an anomaly, doesn't it? 98% here and only 50% there are small business. Why the difference? In large part because the Americans insist that if you want to do business in America, you take your businesses and you bring the headquarters and set them up in America. So tech companies, etc., all go down to Silicon Valley. They're required to go into there. They're required to get on the NASDAQ exchange. They don't want to deal with the Toronto Stock Exchange necessarily, the industrial investors down there, the industry investors down there. They prefer to be an American, something they understand, priced in American dollars. And so there's this hemorrhaging of our best companies as they go through the incubator period and get something of substance. They're flying to the States. And so this is just another illustration of us going down there to seize their brand and their assets and their infrastructure for dealing with the goods. Well, the final thing here, I see PhDs are leaving academia to launch their own businesses. This is a story of more and more folks that are tired of writing papers and journal articles and stuff and giving out good suggestions. And so a number now are leaving academia to go and actually follow up on their suggestions and make some money. And so that was interesting. Folks, I think that's plenty for today. We've had a good session. Apologize for my rambling. I'm prone to do that as I get older. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the session. And number 5, I'm here for you. Call me if you need help. I'll be around on the weekends. Bye for now.